Now this is Podgazing.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Podgazer podcast. I am joined today by Mr. Roger Christian. How are you, Mr. Christian?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good,
all is
good.
well. Yeah.
I'm glad to see you made it back safely from LA. That's good to see,
Yep.
especially with
Yeah,
everything
that was
going
a
on
quick.
out there.
Yeah, it was a very fast trip.
Crazy what's going on out there. I'm glad they're starting to get things figured out. So
Yeah, there was no evidence. In fact, we got there and it was raining for the whole time.
wow.
Yeah. So I was hoping my son would get a bit of vitamin D, but no chance.
Oh man, that was not in the cards for you that day.
No. It came out as we were leaving, so we glimpsed it and we saw what we were missing. But it needed it desperately there. So
Absolutely.
yeah, there you go.
So I'll just start off just asking you some simple questions.
Okay.
So just to start at the beginning, like what got you started into, set design, prop design, like what got you started down that path?
Well, I grew up in a small town near Reading where there was no connection to cinema. The only thing I knew was dragging my mother to Saturday morning cinema in the local cinema where we'd always go and watch, Saturday morning movies and stuff. That's my only connection, because it didn't even have a TV. And it was later on figuring things out. I hated school. And the only, this is a different time back then.
Yeah.
I don't know why teachers were teachers, apart from they could take out all their sadistic desires on children who were willing victims. And the only person who treated me like a human being was the art master. So I naturally went that way. And I managed to get out of school into a art tech school in the center of the city, where I redid all my exams. That I only got 2 out of all the school years, and I got 6 in the next 1 year, just being treated differently. It wasn't that I was stupid, it was just, I rebelled. Yeah. Anyway, to keep earning money, I was putting up marquees, which are huge tents all over the south of England. And we as students got these jobs, and we earned a lot of money. And it was 7 days a week, like 6 in the morning till 10 at night. It was nonstop. And one day, putting up marquees, I noticed what I could see was a prison camp. So I broke away and went over there and said, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, "Oh, we're building a set." And I said, "Well, it's so real." And they said, yeah, we know. There's a homeless man comes by every day and gives us food. He thinks we're in prison. It turned out to be a set for Pinewood Studios.
Oh, cool.
Which was next door. So the next lunchtime in my break, I went, of course, couldn't get in. So I found a hole under the fence, got under the fence, and with a mate of mine. And they happened to be filming James Bond movie, and the doors were open. And I got a glimpse of a world that I knew nothing about, that something happened in my brain. And I walked into this empty prop room, and there were piles of gold bars. And then I picked them up and realized this was all fake. It was plaster of Paris, but it looked so real.
Wow.
And so I thought, wow, I got to do this. And at the same time, my mate in art school had bought this Jaguar, huge old Jag, for no money. And we toured London in it. And at the first film I saw in a big cinema in the West End was Dr. Zhivago. And I'd had an out-of-body experience, which I kind of learned to deal with when I was young. And I happened again in the cinema with this music rising and everything. And I thought, that's it. I got to do this. So it took a few years of struggling, writing letters. I realized then the only advice I was given, go and do architecture, go in the art department, because you've already done art. That's your easy way in, as you don't know anyone.
Yeah.
I did 2 years of architecture, got my degree, and the principal, who I got to know very well, said, now I think you should go and do what you really love, because you're going to be bored stiff the next few years here. So I managed to get an interview somehow at EMI Studios, and this art director, Charlie Bishop, was doing a big TV series called Department S. And he looked at all my work and he said, listen, having spoken to you, I would take you on instantly, but I'm just finishing the series. I've set you up an appointment at Shepperton Studios. Can you get there on Thursday? So, of course, whatever I was going to do, I was going to get there.
You got it.
And I go in, and my interview is with John Box, who designed Dr. Zhivago.
Wow.
And Lawrence of Arabia. He was doing a musical called Oliver. And again, he looked at my work and he said, and spoke to me, and he said, look, I'll take you on if you'll make the tea, because we need a tea boy. I didn't realize then that I would be making tea all day long, or coffee, for this art department, but it didn't matter. I kept explaining I could draw and do sets and things like that, and eventually I just started making worse and worse tea and coffee, on the gamble that I would get fired or get elevated. And John Box, in fact, really mentored me. He took me under the wing, and here I am. I'd come from art school. I had hair down my shoulders. I was in Cuban boots. I was watching every weekend every art movie. We had 12 cinemas in London, watching everything I could get my hands on, in a bunch of suited ties and suits people with short haircuts, telling me to get a haircut every day and shape up, and this is a career and this is not, and stop watching all this arty farty stuff, they called it, which I would have nothing of. And John Box really mentored me, and so I got elevated up onto the drawing board. That's and cool. I got a job then with Charlie Bishop, who the original art director I met on Randon Hopkirk, deceased, and was on the drawing board, and he knew I was bored stiff drawing up sets all day long. I'd happened to draw a crazy artist who was psychologically damaged set for him, and the set decorator, there was tremendous pressure on these series then to get done. There was, what we had to achieve every week. He had a mental breakdown, and they realized he wasn't coming back, and I got a call to the set, and I thought, oh God, they can't film this crazy set that I've done. And the director was there, the producer, the financiers, everybody, Charlie Bishop, and they looked at me, and the director said, wow, this is the best set we've ever had. And I went, oh, really? And they said, would you like to set decorate from now on? And that was it. It was the turning stone. So I leapfrogged what normally you would have to spend 10 years on a drawing board and then slowly move into art. And by the time you got to be a designer, all the creativity would be bashed out of you. You were just there as a career. So it was very lucky for me, actually.
So what was that like? Like, you said you watched that movie and all of a sudden it's Mr. Box that you're in this interview with. Like, what was that like? That had to be kind of surreal in the moment.
It was, it's interesting because he folded my folder of all this work, and he said, listen, I'm going to tell you about the film industry. You're in a desert. You've got a bottle of green ink in your pocket, and you're standing next to an airplane, and there's a big cloud of dust coming, and the director and producer get out and say, wow, this is great. Can you have it read by tomorrow morning? And he said, that's the film industry, and you do it, or you talk your way out of it, you find an alternative. And that kind of served me for my entire career. And also, he, John was an amazingly humble, kind of quiet man of immense talent and could hardly draw. And I would look at these paintings and I could see what was in them, and they would all laugh at him behind their back, the art department. They were pretty bad.
Yeah.
But the colors were there. And then one day I remember he called me into the office. They were all there standing around. He said, listen, the colors for this set exactly, look what Roger's wearing. That's exactly what I want. And he mentored me like that. I could see the rest of them grimacing.
Yeah.
But there was just some kindred kind of spirit. And I got to know very well, they had a fantastic artist on there. He and I became great friends. And I would escape. I wasn't allowed out of the art department, but I wanted to see these sets. And if you ever watch the musical Oliver that Sir Carol Reed directed, the Dickensian London sets are absolutely 100% real and amazing. And I would go down to look at what it was, and I got to know the set decorator, and I would go and see him and see what he was doing. And then one of the art department would come up and say, get back in the office. If you're ever out again, you'll be fired. I mean, it was a kind of strange time, but I picked up so much from John, and he followed me always a career. I met him again many years later, and I told him what he said to me about the airplane, and he said, oh, very prophetic, wasn't it? I can't remember that, but it was. There was some communion of spirit there, and really, I think everything I used on Star Wars, Alien, everything all came from John Box. I think always from what I learned on that first movie. So
that's cool.
Yeah, and I would constantly ask him. I found out that Charlie Bishop was the art director who did the Ice Palace on Zhivago, which was an extraordinary set. So, I was, how do you do that? And he's telling me weeks of candle wax they burnt to make it look, and then all the flowers that were there at one point, because it was 2 seasons. He said we put all those in by hand.
Wow.
The leaves when they blew off the trees when the music was going, which is the scene that really got me, when the young boy's standing by the grave. He said we sewed those on with cotton by hand, each one, so that we could put the wind machines on.
Wow.
All this stuff was kind of being revealed to me, thinking, wow, this is a world I have to be part of.
That's cool. That's really cool. I know one of the things too, reading your book, which I got behind me here, that like right at the beginning, a lot of times we think of like the film industry as like you stand behind a camera, you let it go, and then you kind of edit it in the end. But one of the things that stuck out to me is you're talking about, and I'm going to use these 2 words, Alice's Restaurant. You talk about getting paratyphoid working on Lucky Lady and all these things. Like, take us through that experience. You're working on Lucky Lady and all these things are happening. And
well, I'd kind of advanced, and then I'd worked a lot with Les Dilley, another art director, and he was a plasterer, so he did the nuts and bolts, how to do things. I was always the one who did the creative stuff, the set decorating and colors and all of this. And we were working for young designers. They were on Lucky Lady, just John Barry, Norman Reynolds, and Les. It was a massive film. I think the biggest film of its day. And they realized they needed help. So Les suggested me. I got a call, again, serendipity here, because the call from 20th Century Fox in London said, oh, they would like you. And I said, fine, because it was raining. And I thought, I'm in England and I got a chance to fly tomorrow to Mexico. And he said, yeah, well, it's in a place called Guaymas. You won't know where it is. And I said, actually, I do. I've been there. My mate and I earned some money on a movie. I did 3 weeks of research for them, and my mate had some money, and we got a ticket that we could go anywhere in America in 21 days for £70 by flying. And so we went, and we ended up in Guaymas. So I knew it, and I knew,
wow,
when I woke up on a beach, there was pelicans in a bay with palm trees. I mean, it was just paradise. So I didn't take any persuading, but also I knew John Barry was designing it. And John Barry designed Clockwork Orange for Stanley Kubrick. He went on to do Superman. I mean, another extraordinary talent. So it was a no-brainer for me. I got on the plane and I was working on this film. What happened was Stanley Donen was a song and dance man. This was a massive thriller set in the 20s and 30s, running America. And so John Barry and Les had to move on to Mexico City. They left Les and I. And just to tell you, we counted the lunch boxes one day. There were 500 for the second unit.
Wow.
So there was about, 1,000 people working on this huge movie. It was out of control. And because of that, we went into July, which is like the heat was unbearable. And at that time, this is 1974, it was pretty unsanitary everywhere. It was not, it was very poor then. So a lot of us got really sick. I was the worst. I got paratyphoid, and ended up being taken into a hospital. I'd collapsed. I like British, we go on working till you drop, and I dropped.
Yeah.
And I was put in this clinic. I remember rushed in. There was still blood on the bed from the last patient, everything, and I was plugged into tubes and things, couldn't speak a word of the language. And there was for some reason, there was a poster of Scotland on the wall. And I remember at one point thinking it was literally that dying would be better than this. I felt so bad. And then there was actually they had me on a drip feed, and I was watching a bubble going down the pipe. And I thought, that when that goes in my vein, that's it.
I'm gonna die.
And so, and when it was a few inches above, the door opened and a nurse came in, and I kind of freaked and pointed at it, and she laughed and turned the nozzle on the feed, and it went zooming into my arm. Later on, I asked, and they said, "Oh, that's a different vein." It was actually this way was okay. And I kind of made a vow then, right, I'm not going to die in Mexico. I got too many other things to do. I got a life to live. And so I committed myself to getting well as fast as I could, which is what I did. Took a long time, but I got shipped out. And while we were in Mexico, Gloria and Willard Hike wrote Lucky Lady. They were student friends of George Lucas's. They wrote some of Star Wars character dialogue and stuff for him, uncredited. And when George was offered only $4 million to make Star Wars with, there were studios free in England, and it was cheap. No one was working. There was nothing free in America. And so they decided we'll do it in England because it was half the price of America. And Gary's budget at that time was $8 million. So they said, we can do it for $4 million. So George and Gary flew down on Gloria and Willard's advice. And John and I had become great friends with them. I mean, they were extraordinary people. And I got out of Mexico, was into a hospital in America, but they already found, actually the Mexican doctors had cured me already.
Okay.
And we were told to meet in Alice's restaurant on Malibu Pier. And John said, well, we've been asked to do Star Wars. If you'd like to set decorate it, just be in August the 3rd in London. So I was the third person hired on Star Wars ever. And it was kind of, I was dressing a salt factory at the time, and with a shovel, and George arrived. He picked up a shovel. He actually helped me. This is George. And we were talking, and then he said, I want to do this science fiction movie. And so I was honest. I said, so far, none of the science fiction movies I've ever watched, I believed. They were all over designed and nothing was real. And I think it should be like an old car in a garage dripping oil. I think this is what it should be.
Yeah.
And he then said that exactly the words, well, I'm trying to make a spaghetti Western in space, where I adored, where Kurosawa was my mentor. I mean, I watched his films nonstop. And so was Sergio Leone, the spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood. So this was music to my ears. And that's how that kind of destiny struck at that point in time.
That's wild when things like that just kind of coincide,
Yeah, it's the Force.
Yes, it's the Force. Absolutely. The Force had a hand in it.
Yeah.
I mean, so from reading your book, when you're talking about some of these things, it seems like you and George hit it off pretty well right away. You guys kind of shared the same vision.
Sorry, George's huge ability is to, and I think partly it's like the Force, it's like Buddhism. The instinct he has is to hire people on instinct who he never has to tell how to do something.
Right.
He hires them and he knows it's impossible what he's written, but they'll figure out how to do it.
Right. They'll paint that airplane red.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how we hit it off. And, and also don't forget, they didn't trigger the film. We were 4 months in August to Christmas in a very tiny studio in London. And there was only John Barry, myself, and Les Dilly, Robert Watts, and George and Gary. That was it. And one carpenter I brought in who would work for nothing to build an R2D2 and a speeder, like experimenting. How on earth do we do these? Because it's not possible to do it at that time.
Right.
And so we got to know each other. We'd have 8mm projector and watch films in the evening. And George supplied the script and 6 paintings by Ralph McQuarrie, who's the unsung genius of Star Wars. And in those 6 paintings is the world of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that was it. There were no discussions on what it was going to look like, how to do anything. There was just talk about the world that he wanted to create and how on earth we were going to do it.
Yeah.
So we became friends, we'd have lunch every day together when George was there, and we would be in the studios and we worked out how to make R2D2 work, because it was impossible. And without him, there was no movie.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you go ahead.
Radio control was very primitive in those days. We knew it. And I remember Daleks, who frightened me as a kid, and they have people inside them. So we decided we would build R2D2 round a little person. And we found Kenny Baker, who was only 3'8". And we measured the height off the Ralph McQuarrie painting, and he had to be 4 foot or under R2D2 to work.
Yeah.
And so Bill bought us a wooden one, and we somehow got him working.
Man. So when you were looking, like you said, you had a really small budget and you're doing this in England, and you're looking, you talk about in your book, you kind of go through the script and you have different categories that you categorize everything in. Like, as you're starting to add up all these things that you're going to need for the movie, was there ever a time where you're just like, man, I don't know how we're going to make this work? But I mean, you're going to make it work, but you're just like, whoo.
Yeah, I did. I did the breakdown of my weapons and the robots and the guns, because in those days, set decorator did everything like that alone. I mean, that was my job, and I looked at it all and said, I can't do this. It's just impossible. But I'm going to do it because this is a dream job for me. And and I like George, and the whole philosophy of what we could put together if we could do it was like a life's chance for me. And so that's, I think, weapons were my pet peeve, let's say, on science fiction films. They were always horrible beeping. And so I decided I knew I didn't have time, because we knew we were going to be shooting in March. And by the time we triggered, there was only a couple of months of prep, which is ridiculously low. And my budget was so small, I couldn't afford to make anything in the studio workshops. So I figured if I rent guns and stick bits on them, I could actually make World War I and World War II weapons into science fiction. And I already loved the Sterling submachine gun. So I thought, I knew the owners of the gun hire facility very well. So they set me up with a table. I just went on my own, and I got a Sterling, and I got some T-strip and stuck it around. And then I dug through boxes, found these sights from Ireland, the scopes.
Okay.
And I stuck bits on just temporarily, white with soup glue, and made it look like a gun. And then I thought, well, he's describing Han Solo as a cowboy, and the Mauser is exactly a cowboy's gun. But so again, I stuck stuff on that. And at that point, I called John Barry and said, listen, I'm in Baptist. I put together these weapons. You better bring George and show him and see if I'm actually on the right track here. Again, I could have been fired at that point.
Yeah.
And George came, loved them. They could fire. You got a smoke and a flash out of the end of it, unlike any other science fiction movie. Yeah. And they looked real, and they were heavy, and George loved them. And then he stayed behind with me, and we made Princess Leia's gun together. Stuck that on a starting pistol. And so I thought, okay, I can do this. They have endless stock of stormtroopers, and they had 4 Mausers with cut off short barrels that have been modified for other movies. And so I could stick like the flash hider on the end with no problem, easily. And so I just kept going through Baptist looking. I found the bowcaster one day, and showed George, because I said Ralph McQuarrie's painted him with a blaster, but this would be so cool. So that's our relationship, was that I showed George. He never ever turned down one prop, one set, nothing that I did. It was just a matter of bringing it to him.
Wow. And it's cool too, because those guns and stuff that you used give that oily, drippy, like they've been used effect.
Yeah, and actors had to fire them, they were heavy, so they weren't acting. These were real, and I was very careful to. It wasn't just a matter of getting anything and stick it in a hand. I thought, well, the Tusken Raiders, they're desert people. They don't have anything. So I found the gaffy stick, which was an African warriors club. And I just thought, wow, this is fantastic. And I had to change everything a little bit. That was my philosophy. So I got a wooden mace that they'd made, and I stuck that in the end, and that was the gaffy stick. And with the lightsabers, which is another story, but I knew I had to differentiate between Luke's one, Obi-Wan, who's an old mystic, and the ones for the Darth Vader. That was the cold, engineered world, different to these desert rebels. So I kind of approached it all like that. And also, while I was experimenting, I had a Mustang, so I was a bit different in London. Then it was so big in London, but I just loved the design of it, and I wanted something different. So I was driving around one day, and my favorite band were the Doors. I was listening to the Doors, and I thought, you know what? I got some bits of scrap to make this wooden R2-D2 look better, to show George. I could use scrapped airplane junk and stick it in the sets, and I could make the Millennium Falcon look like a mix between an old submarine and a bomber.
Yeah.
And that's how that came about. See, and I had to go into George, crossing my fingers with John Barry, and say, look, I've got this idea. if I used airplane scrap, I could make the sets out of it. See, and honestly, I kind of worked it out writing the book that George had made THX, the 1138, in the streets of Los Angeles. So he understood the process that you have to get something real and make it work. And so they just said, fine, do it. And the moment the film triggered, we moved into EMI. Within days, I was on a little prop plane with 3 others flying around airfields. And to my amazement, there were mountains of scrap junk by the airfields, even lying in the rain, on just thrown away, with Rolls-Royce Derwent engines and
wow,
whole airliners, everything that was there. So I don't think I spent more than about £100 on buying enough scrap to do the entire movie.
Yeah.
That made it work.
Yeah. You talk about throwing those pieces together. Every time I love World War II history. And so, like, for me, every time I look at the Millennium Falcon cockpit, I'm like, that's from a World War II bomber. It has to be, and it's cool that you were able to put those pieces together.
Yeah, that's the inspiration was for it. Now, interesting enough, that was the first set we ever did. And John Barry had hired Harry Lang, who was an art director on 2001, because he wanted that kind of look for the Death Star. And Harry's job was to do the Millennium Falcon cockpit. And it was all beautifully drawn up. He managed to do it that way. And I kept going into him, this kid, me, so young then, I kept going in saying, Harry, I'm going to mess this up. He would look at me like, what is this child talking about? And he finished and he said, well, here you are. So I took his seats out. I'd got some old fighter pilot seats, ejector seats, and put those in for Harrison. And I noticed recently on an interview that Harrison was talking about Chewbacca couldn't even get in. But they look great,
Yeah.
And I messed it all up and made it look like what I thought it should be.
Yeah.
And they let me show George. So I called George down and he came and looked at the set. That was it. He smiled and there it was, what he was imagining.
That's so cool.
And then the main set of the hold area that was where I'd come up with this crazy idea and I was loading in pipes. I had drain pipes and wiring. We bought an old telephone exchange being broken down, everything. I was piling it in and it looked terrible. And it kept looking terrible. And I kept going with my props and I was hoping people wouldn't come on the set because they would think, what the hell is he doing? And I just kept going and going and going, layering it and layering it. And then we're putting oil drips and putting in, everything in it. And then suddenly it emerged. And I watched them people coming on the set just absolutely dazzled by how we'd gone and got a ship. So let me sum it up. There's one funny story. When Frank Bruton is the huge prop master in the industry. He did David Lean's movies and Stanley Kubrick's, right? One of the very few on that crew who understood and supported me, at least, and John Barry, because very few did. Yeah. So he called me boy. He said, what do you want, boy? And I said, clean out the prop room because there's no curtains, there's no tables, nothing. I've got to bring in all this airplane stuff and put up some metal shelves and stuff, which he did. And then the day the first truck arrived, and it was a massive low loader, and it was piled with airplane junk. They were roped on, airplane jet engines. Frank came down to look, and I'm standing next to him in the prop room as the thing backed in. He never looked at me. He just said, you're mad, boy. And I thought, yeah, well, and then, but this is Frank. Then he said, okay, boy, in my office, 10 minutes, I've got the tea on, you tell me what you need me to do. And that was Frank. So I told him, I need the props to have tools. We got to break all this down into components, and we make them in units, and that's how they'll go on the walls. You don't just stick it randomly. It has to be engineered on. And that was how we did it at the end.
Wow. That's cool. So kind of going through, you talked about building R2D2 and then C3PO. You guys kind of decided you're going to need someone to be in C3PO, kind of making them work. Did George bring you in to help find someone to be that person, or was it kind of on his own?
The early discussion when George was first there were R2D2, and we knew there was no way to do it apart from, and we said to him, you've got to find a strong actor who's only 3'8", which he did. He found Kenny Baker. Our discussions were that Metropolis, which was made in 1927, had Maria, the gold robot. She walked 3 paces. So we knew, like 30, 40 years later, we could make that work. So the kind of instructions were the ideal would be a thin actor who did mime and trained that way. And that was it. Then he had to go and find, and he found Anthony Daniels.
Who did phenomenal.
Yeah, and then Norman Reynolds joined us very late. He was on another movie. He took on that, how to make him work, and had to invent a new arm mechanism that he could move the arm both ways. He drew all of that up. And when we were in the studio, we got a very expensive forerunner to a plastic molding machine that was very expensive. There was only one, but we were able to print out his costume pieces. It was molded in clay first. It was the old-fashioned way of doing it. And then they molded it and made pieces. In fact, the Death Star, John was able to do that whole huge sets. They printed out sheets on this thing that were fairly, they weren't very stiff, but they made a wooden frame throughout the studio, and then they were stapled on. And he was able to do huge scale on that way of doing it. And then C3PO, it was a continuing developing process up towards shooting. In my set decorating office, and we were so busy, we hardly ever talked to each other during the day. So I had a kettle in my office, some mugs, tea bags, and a bit of milk in a fridge. And the most important item were McVitie chocolate biscuits, which the film industry survived on, I think still does. So we would meet in my office in the morning, and one day it came up about C3PO's eyes. They couldn't figure out how to do it. And I just kind of blindly said, look, my pet peeve is seeing actors behind.
Right.
Why don't we get some one-way mirror? And it came because I was watching a police series at home.
Okay.
And they have those mirrors where the witness to the criminals, they'd line 6 of them up and then they couldn't be seen. I thought that would work. If we did that, then we could probably fit it in the eyes and they'd reflect the desert and stuff like that. And they said, oh, that's a good idea, Roger, you do the eyes. I had so much to do, but that got landed on my lap. So, we found a local engineer. He made the brass rings exactly the same size and with the little grill pieces on it. And I got some plexiglass cut to the right size, and we got it one-way mirrored. And I made a little hole in the middle to be a pupil and that he could see through, and it worked. We put it together.
Wow.
It was all like, oh, I know what we could do. We just did it. But, with C3PO, the first time he actually tried the full costume ever was in Tunisia on the first day of shooting, right before shooting.
Wow.
And George showed me later he was digitizing the 6 films for the digital release of the first 6 Star Wars, and he was showing me, because he was doing it, he said, it's terrible, now it's digital. You can see all the gold tape holding him together. You could see the gaffer tape holding Darth Vader together. He had to redo nearly all of the effects on those first movie.
Wow.
But you don't see it on film, and you don't see it with the kind of diffusion that George wanted to make it look like a spaghetti Western.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
take us through too a little bit. You talked about a little bit about the lightsaber, and you said that's a whole other story. Not only just coming up with the first lightsaber we ever see on film, then you talk about you had to design Obi-Wan's lightsaber, and then in Return of the Jedi, Luke's got another lightsaber. So kind of take us through a little bit of that story of how you kind of came up with those.
Well, I was under tremendous pressure because the trucks were going to leave for Tunisia for the shoot, and they wanted the lightsaber, and I hadn't found anything. I collected. I had the buyer who worked with me. He would bring in broken camera parts, broken. There was no computers in those days, calculators, anything he could get his hands on. I would pick out things I liked the shape of, and they would fill my office. And I got so many, I moved to the next office. I never found anything that I thought justified a lightsaber. I searched through Baptist. I searched everywhere. It came about because I had to make Luke's binoculars for Tunisia. So I got a Yumi, an old broken camera, and there was a still camera pieces that had a flip up on the end, and I thought, oh, well, I super glued that onto the end of it and put on a front plate on it. And I thought, you know what, for the audience to know what this is, I need some lenses on the front, two camera lenses. That'll make it look like what it is. So I went to the one shop, Brunnings, where we got all of our camera equipment from, and I bought 2 very cheap lenses. That was due. And then I just happened to say to the manager, David French, one day, who rented out press cameras for movies, I said, I've got to make this weapon. Do you have anything that I could look at here? And he said, well, we got torches. And I said, no, they won't work. And, the special effects boys have made some up, and George rejected them immediately. They just didn't look the part. He said, well, have a look under the desk, under the shelves there. There's a load of old boxes. And the first one I opened up, there were 3 Graflex handles in there, which are they're the battery case for the reflector that clips onto the camera. And literally, I just took it out and thought, that's a lightsaber. I loved the shape of it, and I rushed back to the studio. I had some T-strip left over from the Stormtrooper's blaster, and I stuck some round. I did all this with super glue just myself, and I first tried 6, and then when I actually stuck them on, I managed to get 7 on, and I'd broken down a calculator, and inside there was bubble strip that illuminated and magnified the numbers. That fitted in the clip that it clipped onto the camera with, which was the one thing I didn't like. And I thought, wow, here's a lightsaber. So I called George over again. I said, I think I found it. He's just written a foreword for Cinema Alchemist. I think, have you got the new version there?
Of the Cinema Alchemist?
Yeah.
Yes.
The republished with George on the cover. Yeah, very kindly. I didn't think he'd do it because he never does this anymore for anybody, but he very kindly wrote me a foreword. And he says there, I still remember the day Roger came in with a camera part and showed me a lifesaver. And he said, but that was only one of 100 things he did that day. But that was it. So no one knew how to do the actual blade. And I did suggest again at one of these early morning tea breaks that I used to do with a mate of mine some exhibition stuff, and we would paint front projection paint onto objects and we could get them to shine on set. And I kind of suggested that might work. Which point George said, do it. And then there was this meeting with all the special effects boys and everything. And then when I brought it up, Gil Taylor, the very obnoxious director of photography, said, that won't work. And I'm not having that on my sets. And that'll spoil my lighting, everything. And George overruled him and just said, Roger, try it. So they drilled out my Graflex handle, put in a little motor that made it revolve. And also it was a tiny bit off center, so it kind of wobbled a little bit like that. It vibrated,
Okay,
and it worked. It worked. We did get a glow out of it, and that glow, it was enough for the rotoscopers, because that's the only way to do it then without CGI or anything. They would hand paint more of the blade in, but that also satisfied, because we discussed between us that because it was a blade of light, it shouldn't go through. It should hit like a sword does.
yeah,
That would make more sense. Like we're talking about samurai sword fights, and so that helped. Like, because the only sword lightsaber fight is with Alec Guinness and Dave Prowse. So they were able to hit. They were breaking so many because they were so thin, you can imagine. But they were able to rehearse and hit and stop in the fight, which was more natural.
that's cool.
That's how we made Star Wars.
That's wild, man. There's so many things. I mean, looking at that movie, like, I mean, you guys revolutionized how things are done. I mean, you really did.
Yeah, and I think that happened because we had a willing director, because we had no money, so no faith from the studio in it. We were allowed to get away with doing stuff like, doing stuff that would never get through any other time, but it was all like gritty, earthy. It was a spaghetti western, and
Right.
I think it was a unique opportunity in time that made that be possible. When with R2-D2, for instance, on the first day of the shoot, about 2 or 3 weeks before we left for Tunisia, John Barry called Les Dilly and I into the office and said, listen, this radio control is not going to work. He's always prophesizing how great everything's going to be, the special effects guy. I know it's not going to work. Build a lightweight one in fiberglass, paint it, put it on the truck that you can pull on fishing wire. Don't tell anyone. He said, I'll only let Gary Kurtz know. First shot, literally, R2-D2 crashes out of control, and the special effects head, John Steers, who was there, ran in front of the whole crew and said, oh, it's the blooming taxis. They've upset my radio control. We were 3 miles up a desert track, about 3 or 4 miles from a tiny, sleepy little town where the taxi was one. The rest were either camels or donkey carts. And he'd obviously use this excuse in London all the time. It didn't work. But then they just said, can you get your one out? So we got ours out. And anytime the three-legged was needed, most of the shots on that first film are done. We put a flat board down, hit the edge with sand, and we pulled it on a fishing wire.
Wow.
The only one that worked was when he went downhill in the valley, before he got zapped.
Yeah.
Then it worked, that one, but otherwise, no, it was all pulled along.
That's crazy. Yeah, you don't, I mean, it's so well done. Like you said too, like, yeah, you revolutionized it, but you had to, right? You had no other choice than to revolutionize what you were doing.
Yeah, and George is also a very, very good editor, and he would film and he would get a piece before R2-D2 went out of control or before we'd be seen. He knew the bits that he could get. He always says he got about 25% of what he actually went to get in Tunisia. The rest of it didn't work. But he knew. And in fact, go back now and watch that scene where they're buying R2-D2, Obi-Wan and his uncle Ben, and you'll see the whole scene is about R2-D2. He's he's bringing the message. He's the
Yeah.
storyteller. He's actually not that much in it. It's only in it whatever George could cut together.
That's true. Yeah, it's usually just Uncle Owen and the Luke and then the
Yeah.
Jawas.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
even the red one that exploded, the head.
Yeah.
So they'd forgotten when that scene came up to shoot, they couldn't get the explosives. They filled it with radio control equipment. And there was a lot of scratching heads. So Les and we quickly repainted our spare R2-D2. So it was empty, stuck the head on and pulled it along on fishing wire, made it work.
Wow.
It's kind of like, it's like student filmmaking, really, but on a fairly big level with no money.
So the lightsaber that you originally created, you said were for some parts. Were they kind of the other lightsabers like Luke's and Obi-Wan's and Vader's, like, were they kind of the same thing, some of those camera parts, or are those a little bit different?
There is a piece of camera part in it, but Obi-Wan's is a rifle grenade. It was a special grenade that had a stick on the end of it. You could put in a rifle and fire it much further than you could throw it. And that was the base for it. From the Rolls-Royce engines that I stripped down, there's a piece of a Derwent engine in there. And there's a piece of a machine gun part on there. I couldn't find anything, and I got all these plumbing parts, so we stuck a tap on the end. So this came up last year. I was at a big event with David West Reynolds, who was the head of literature at Star Wars, and he wrote the making of the Star Wars dictionary. He said, "I've got to ask you this: was it H or C? Was it hot or cold?" I said, "Well, what have you got?" And he had the end. He said, "Oh, I've got a hot on the end of mine." So I said, "David, you have to imagine that I would never ever make something whereby the audience would say, 'Oh, he must have gone to the plumbing shop and bought a tap.'" So I took it off. I said, "That end has never been seen. There's a gap at the end if you look closely."
Interesting.
That is something that it just worked at the time,
Yeah.
And Darth Vader's, they on the set, I interviewed David French, the manager of Brunnings, a couple of years ago, because I'm making a whole documentary based on the book, and I interviewed him, and he said that apart from my 3, they had called him then and said, "Do you have any more of these?" And he said, "Yes. How many do you want?" And he had let them have another 30. So 33 Graflex handles went to the studios for Star Wars.
Wow.
And they made they had to make up all the ones for the spinning blade, and there were lightweight ones and some that my rubber T-strips hurt his hands, so we had some with foam on them, things like that.
Yeah.
So Darth Vader's, I thought, let's give it to the special effects boys, because they'll make it much more engineered. Not having time or money or either, they found the MPP, which is very similar Graflex handle, but it had a nicely engineered end. So they used that one for Darth Vader's.
That's cool.
I always had ideas at the time, and we're talking about doing one now, that I think Darth Vader, especially when he got the suit and went through the transformation from Anakin to becoming Darth Vader, he should have gone and got his own lightsaber like all of them did.
Yep.
I'm just designing one at the moment that would be what I imagined how that could have been, because I directed George afterwards as a thank you. He commissioned my short film Black Angel, the one behind here, to go out with Empire Strikes Back as a program, and then had me direct second unit on Return of the Jedi first off. And when I went, it was a huge endeavor by then, huge crews, and everybody was doing what George wanted, and it was a much easier shoot, but it was massive. But I had noticed then that Darth Vader, it's a bit of a story. On the second film, I was making Black Angel, so I wasn't available, and nor was John Barry. He was doing Saturn III.
Okay.
So they'd hired a set decorator who was a very dear friend of mine, who was much better at period films. You know, you have to know science fiction. I read everything. I was an avid reader, and you know, my first ever comic was Dan Dare. So I've no reason why, stuck rivets in the handle in the T-strip of my Graflex for Luke, which kind of shocked me at the end, because I thought that humanizes it. Looks human made. It's a mystical weapon of a Jedi. You can't do that. And sadly, that went all the way through Star Wars. That became canon. It irks me every time I see it. Well, then they'd lost Darth Vader's lightsaber for Jedi, and so he just simply took Obi-Wan Kenobi's and changed one piece on it and gave that to Darth Vader, which I don't think is good enough.
No.
I think this transformation into the most iconic evil character in history of cinema would have gone, like all the Jedis had to, gone and found his own crystal and forged his own lightsaber, and it should have been a steampunk kind of something that really echoed the look of that amazing look that we saw.
Yeah. So, and I love little bits too in Star Wars, like Attack of the Clones, like Anakin's lightsaber in Attack of the Clones is a cleaned up Darth Vader. You know what I mean? And I love stuff like that. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting, you know, I was watching Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series, and right to the end, Obi-Wan had to get out the lightsaber. It was in a hole in the ground, remember? Yeah. I'm sitting there thinking, what's he going to do? What's he going to pull up with the rivets or my original? Because this is the original.
Yeah.
Right before it happened. And Dave Filoni, God bless him, who's anal about all the details, put my lightsaber, the original one that he took out.
Good man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, Dave Filoni, I will say he's got it. He knows his stuff.
He does know his stuff. Yeah.
It's just cool. Yeah. So what was your reaction? Like, you've worked on this tirelessly with George, especially like the first A New Hope, and you know, you put this movie together. What was your reaction when you first saw it for the first time as a whole?
It was it was in the Dominion Theatre in Tottenham Court Road in London, and they had a crew screening, cast and crew, big theatre. So I went in there, you know, knowing George so well and knowing what we'd done, and I hadn't really seen much. And so that, I think it's like everywhere in the world, and it's really interesting. The moment that ship, you know, the graphics went away, and that was different. And then this ship coming overhead, the entire cinema atmosphere changed. It rose. It became electric.
Yeah.
And I knew then we were in to see something different, and what we'd done was going to change cinema forever, you know. And we came out, and all these people who cried us and denied us and given us such a bad time. Oh, wow, well, look what we did. Fantastic. You know, they were all over it. But during shooting, they'd given George the most terrible time. No one believed in it. They all thought it was a pile of rubbish, a children's film and it was science fiction, which in those days was pretty decried everywhere, especially in Britain. No one really had any appreciation for it. So it was a huge kind of relief, really.
Yeah.
What I'd gone out on a limb for. And, you know, we were like, with George, we were like a group of young cinema revolutionaries, really.
Yeah.
Trying to put something together. Yeah.
Yeah. That is, I'm sure that was probably for you, like you said, it's just a breath of fresh air, you know, just a sigh of relief, like, whew, like, yes, okay,
Yeah,
is
and
awesome.
it was like a dream come true. You know, I was watching a movie that I believed, and I could see the audiences believed as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I think, you know, it did change cinema. It changed the world perception of cinema. But what people didn't understand, you know, and I was very immersed into myth and legend at the time. So, and Excalibur, King Arthur was one of my favorite stories. So, you know, when I read about the lightsaber, I knew this is a sword of light. This is, when you think of King Arthur, you think of Excalibur, and I knew this would be an icon of Star Wars because it was such a unique idea George had written. I think I understood from training as a Buddhist as well, and I understood the mythology that was right there. And I happen to love Kurosawa, and they're mythic. His samurai movies, they, you know, Joseph Campbell, it's well known how much he influenced George and taught him how to structure Star Wars like a modern myth.
Yeah.
I knew all of that, and that to me was, when I saw it, I thought, wow, this is going to connect to people, and probably people who don't understand. But, you know, Buddhists they're not preached at like in churches. They tell stories, and through the stories you get an idea of the depth of the subconscious and wisdom. And here it was. Here was a modern myth that I thought then, this is going to really change the world.
Yeah, and it did for all, I mean, the generations that have been affected by it. You know, I love Star Wars. All my 3 boys love Star Wars, you know, like, it's completely changed everything. It really did.
Well, you know, I mentioned this to George when I thanked him for the foreword that he wrote, that I'm meeting now people, you know, at events and stuff, and the constant thing is that parents and children are coming together, and George gave us all a way to connect the generations, which is harder now than it ever was. But each generation, the 70s, had a very different sensibility. Men were very closed off, and now there's different things going on. But and George made these movies for 12-year-old kids and for families, and it really worked. It's connected in a. I always say it gave America something to believe in.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, something to rally around. Yeah,
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 yeah.
absolutely.
And we
So
need it as human beings.
we do. We do. That's one of the things, I mean, that's one of the reasons we all love Star Wars, you know? It gives us an escape, something to rally around, you know? Like,
Yeah,
and I love that.
yeah, me too. That's why I support it. That's why I'm doing what I can, you know. And I'm now, we're on the path now with, you know, with this first lightsaber I did with Theory Sabers. It just
I was
sold
gonna
out in
ask you.
3 hours.
Yeah.
I never thought that would happen, but I see how much the fans want and do. So I've now joined up with him, and we're going to do another 2 this year.
Oh,
And
sweet.
I'm building a whole kind of, it's almost like a Roger Christian origin forge, where
That's cool.
I'm going to bring all this stuff together, and it's my time now to do it. I've never done it before.
That's so cool.
I've been very quiet about it all, but as David West Reynolds said, if I don't do it, there is no one. There's no
Yeah.
one left with the stories and how we made everything and all of this. So he said, it's your duty. So you're going to have to do it now, because this film's going to be studied in colleges and universities and fans and everybody for the next infinity, as long
Yeah.
as humans survive. It's marked the future. So I thought, okay, then I got to do it. And I'm enjoying it. I'm loving it. And I love meeting the fans. I have a great time talking, you know, and I get people come, they're crying, they're holding the lightsaber. There's, you know, it's affected people's lives. And I think it's I think it's my duty now to kind of get this elevated out. So once I can get the documentary out, that shows a lot more.
Oh, I
I've
can't wait.
written a second book, which is called We Can All Be Heroes, which
Oh,
is
sweet.
more of my journey that weirdly matches Luke's journey with things that have happened. And so it's a kind of way into through Star Wars and stuff of meditation and finding yourselves, as human beings, which is what Luke had to do. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that about that too. It's funny you bring it up about Theory Sabers and working with them, because I have his this isn't the Origin, but this is the SE, so it's got like no control box on it or anything. But like, what was it like working with him and his team? I mean, so the other night actually he did a live stream and he ended up posting his link up on and I was able to get on and talk to him for about 10 minutes, which was so cool. He's such a nice guy. What was it like working with his team on that Origin Saber?
Well, when we first connected, and then I did about an hour and a half podcast with him, I think, and we were kindred spirits. He loves Star Wars. I mean, deeply. He's very knowledgeable. He's the voice of all fans. He's got himself up to be the biggest one. He takes on Disney, much to their annoyance a lot of times.
I love it though, to be honest.
Personally, he's very honest, and he says what all the fans are thinking.
Yep.
So he stands for them and by them and does all of that. And he and I realized it. And then it was just an idle chatter. We were talking about lightsabers and things like that. And I said, it would be cool, he said, wouldn't it, to make like the first one, but the very origin, before you gave it to George, the one that you kind of saw and put together yourself and then took it to George. And so it just came about naturally.
That's cool.
Yeah. And I thought, and I didn't know that it would do what it did. But it's connected me to the fans in a way bigger way now. And he said, they like what you're doing, yet they like it that you're so behind Star Wars and honest about it and everything. Yeah. And in fact, you're the one who created the lightsaber, so you've got a duty now to. So I'm constantly still making movies, and getting finance is harder than harder. I'm still trying to make the sequel to Black Angel, which will be what I originally intended, but a way bigger movie now and stuff. So cool. That's been promised, and I'm waiting for the funds to do that. And in the meantime, I realized I can be so joyful doing what I used to do and bringing all this stuff to light. So that's now my mission for the next few years.
That's so cool. I love it. I love that you're on a mission to meet the fans, to do all these things. Like, you talked about Theory taking on Disney, which I'm totally okay with, because what was it like for you watching George sign over the company to Disney?
Well, I knew, I had, last time I had lunch, we were kind of talking about this, and he'd wanted to make a digital studio at Skywalker.
Okay.
And the locals prevented him from doing it. They wouldn't give him planning permission. And so he realized then, I can't do what I want. He was getting older, and he's very much a family man. His children are more important than Star Wars to him. And so I could see that, and he wanted this museum, and it's not just Star Wars. He has a huge collection of movie posters of contemporary American art. I mean, an extraordinary amount of things, and he wanted to do this museum, and the only way to do it was, he used half of the money that he got from Disney. That enabled him to build the museum as a lifelong legacy. So I kind of understood why he was doing it, and it was, the trust he put in them that they were going to make the outlines of what he saw Star Wars, and their mistake was never doing that and letting each director do what they want. There was no George had worked out all six. He'd written 3 movies, and he only chose one piece of it to make Star Wars. All the characters are very entwined and worked out. It's as complex as Dune.
Yeah.
What George had done. So letting that go is where it's all gone wrong.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, that's the one thing I always talk about with the people on my channel and stuff is George is a visionary. And so when he put a story together, he knew where the characters started, he knew where they were going, and he knew how to get them there.
Yes.
And it was one big vision. Whereas Disney now, like you said, there's so many different directors, so many different ideas from these directors that there's not one vision for it. It's all their own vision. And so it just creates these stories that are just so splotched and not coherent. And it's just like it's really sad to see. And I'm assuming for yourself, having helped with the originals and put that vision together, it's got to be sad to see now.
Yeah, like, because I still know Mark Hamill and everything, and I saw, it's the Skywalker story. It's Luke Skywalker's hero's journey, which goes from 1 to 9. Well, they killed him off on 8.
Yeah.
And turned him into a kind of whinging failure.
Yep.
We all know in mythology that a certain point the hero will go down to the depths, but they come out of it.
Yeah.
And so, JJ did a masterful job, I think, repairing it for the last movie to make something hugely cinematic that kind of repaired it and took it on into the only way he could do it, really, was to carry on.
Yeah.
But that was a disappointment. And in fact, to me, the hero's journey ends at the end of Return of the Jedi. There's the complete mission of Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
Because he ends, with compassion and forgiveness, with forgiving the father.
Yeah.
And that's George's words. That's George.
Yeah.
And so I think, they've pursued Disney in a whole. It's not just Star Wars. I mean, this whole world balance had to some point change, and it went. I hate the word woke. I just think it's bad English and it's not right. But they all went onto this path, and as actually Nia at Star Wars Theory said recently, we don't care what genre you are. We don't care who you are, what country you come from, what your religion is. We just want the good stories that align to the Star Wars world. That's all you'll want.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. And it was so, like you said, end of episode 7, she's holding out the lightsaber, and to Luke. And I'm like, wow, this could be a powerful moment. And then we get to the beginning of episode 8, and he's looking at it, grabs it, and then tosses it over his shoulder. And I'm like, you just took all of that history that's built in that lightsaber and literally just tossed that entire thing over your shoulder.
I agree. It lost me then completely. I just said, you know what? I think this director's thinking, what could I do that really would be opposite to what everybody thinks? And that's what I'm going to do for that reason. There's no other reason. And it's, burning all the books and everything. This is a token, like a samurai sword, like Excalibur. It's a token it's a sword of light.
Yeah.
And you just the irreverence of that, and having Mark do it is not Luke Skywalker.
It's not. Nope, not at all. Not to mention, he goes, and I've listened to Sam Witwer talk about this too. You have Luke, who's this, he believed in his father. He believed that there was good in his father, one of the most evil people in the world.
Yes.
He goes from that to all of a sudden, I want to kill my nephew because of a bad dream. That's not Luke Skywalker. Come on now.
No, it wasn't. And that's I don't know. I mean, it's a shame, but
it is. Yes.
I'm hoping that they'll do a live action Star Wars. It was talked about a lot, and Rick McCallum was going to do it because I put my name down to direct some of the episodes. I'm just hoping that will one day come about, and George will have a huge influence on it.
Yeah. So do you still talk to George every so often? Or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I keep in touch, and I'm always, I've never betrayed Star Wars. I've never been negative about it, but I've always been supportive about it. So
Yeah.
unlike many people, I'm still able to go to the ranch and sit and have lunch with him. And
That's cool.
and when with Cinema Alchemist, they were debating whether they were going to continue, because they never did any publicity or social media, nothing. So it was still hardly known in America. And they were debating whether to republish it or not. And then they decided to. And then they just said to me, do you think we could just update it a bit? They knew George wouldn't do anything. And they said, could we get, because I know Guillermo del Toro, and I knew he would do me a cover and a forward for it. So I said, yeah, I get somebody. And then I sat here and I thought, you know what? I've never, ever asked George really for anything. So I wrote him a letter, and they phoned me back and said, can you give him 3 weeks? He really wants to do something for you. And
Wow.
the blurb for the cover came out of the blue. I didn't even know he was going to do that. So it kind of triggered everything that I have to do now.
Yeah. And I saw you're going to like Rebel Scum Con and
Yes.
stuff, and some of these other ones. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool that he's going to different cons and conventions and stuff.
Yeah, I'm doing those now. I just practiced here a little bit, but I've just been invited to another one in America. I think there's quite a few that I'm going to now.
Okay.
And yeah, at least I can survive. I sign a few autographs and stuff and meet people, and I'm really happy to do it. And particularly, I don't think there's one convention I've been to where everybody's come up and said, thank you, you changed my life. And that's something that we all need.
Yeah.
I had to find it myself. There was no way to do it. But Star Wars has given something to believe in. And so I like to do what I can to and to also show people that it was a group of kind of rebellious, almost teenagers who had no money, who stuck with their guns and got this made. So it's not a massive, huge Hollywood blockbuster, which kids now see and think it is. This came from humble roots. And so it's an example to find yourself and to go and stick with what you believe and do it.
Yeah.
Practically, because everybody says it, just believe in yourself. But, it doesn't mean much when you hear huge, big, successful, rich stars saying it.
Right. Yeah.
Star Wars is a better way to illustrate that to people.
Yeah. And I'm sure too, for you, like in a way, like when you go to these cons and you see all these people coming up to you and thanking you and stuff, like it's got to be like an amalgamation of your entire career coming together of like, yes, this is all worth it. Like,
yes. Yeah, it was worth it. It was worth sticking by George's side. He was on there's a YouTube video with him talking with Christopher Nolan about filmmaking. And then there one day he stopped. He says, Christopher, there were only 5 people actually stuck by my side making Star Wars, and that was the art department. So I had to believe in myself, and I had to stand by against a lot of opposition, and somehow I had the strength to do it.
Yeah.
So I think these are life's lessons, really, and I'm happy to tell people about that and encourage them.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of as we kind of wind things down here, like as people, this will be out on Sunday. So as people are watching this, and like, what is something like you would tell Star Wars fans just in general, like any kind of message out there for Star Wars fans?
Yeah, it's a thank you for believing in it, for understanding it, for following it and connecting to it, because it's never happened in history before, in the history of cinema. This is unique, and it's global, and the fans believe so much in it that it's okay, you know, if that's what is manifesting in your world and you believe in it, that's okay. It's a good thing to believe in. And you know, there's, you know, people are making lightsabers, they're making stuff out of torches, and then some of them are finding all the original parts, which I never knew what they were. Just bits I liked, and they're reproducing stuff. But behind that is it is a belief in themselves and what they kind of love in life, you know. And I think that's something very important. So I encourage everybody. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your job is an accountant and you're going out dressed up as Luke Skywalker. It's a connection, and it's a connection that we all have together. And boy, do we need it now.
Yes, we do. Yes. Yep, for sure. Well, I appreciate it, Roger Christian. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be on my podcast, and it's an honor.
Not at all.
It really is.
Yeah, well, send me a link because we'll blast it out and whatever I can do as well.
Yes, absolutely. And is there a place where, like, you know, you said you're kind of trying to work on these things, you got a second book. Is there a place people can follow you and kind of keep updated on all these things?
Instagram's the best.
Okay.
It's Roger Christian. There's an Instagram. I'm always on that, very active, and now especially since joining up with Nia at Theory Savers, I will be producing a proper YouTube channel at some point. That probably after May or June. I'm going to start doing that because, you know, I always, everybody's asked me, why are you doing an audio book of Cinema Alchemist? We want to hear you telling the stories. And every one of these fan conventions I do, there's a Q&A, which are always so kind of lively.
Yes.
So I'd like to do that. So if I can't get the publishers to do it, then I can do it starting as a YouTube channel and start telling some of these stories and things. There are so many.
Yeah.
And that's a way to do it. And there is a website. It's just rogerchristian.com, I think.
Okay.
There is a website, which again is basic, but all of that is in works now. My elder son is now taking it over. He said he's working at Deloitte, but he's just got inflamed after seeing the lightsaber and what's going on. And he's grown up with all of this. He said, we're going to work together now and create a whole kind of universe that I can bring to the world now myself as the only remaining person.
That's cool.
Who knows any of this in Star Wars? Nobody knows anything. I mean, George doesn't know how we did it all. He was busy directing.
Right.
And there isn't anyone else. There's nobody.
Wow.
So it's my duty.
Yeah. I'll put a link in the description with rogerchristian.com and then even your Instagram page. So
do that.
Can go follow.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I did follow you on Instagram, so I've been following your stuff on there. Lots of fun. So
yeah, I occasionally put stuff out, you know, bits of stories, and everyone loves it. So yeah, it's fun for me anyway.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up the Audible because I was wondering that myself when I was reading this. I'm like, man, it'd be awesome to hear him talk about this on Audible because I'm a mailman. That's what I do. I walk and deliver mail, and so like I'm like, man, I would love to listen to this while I'm.
Yeah, everybody said the same thing. So that's something I've got to get done. I have to this year.
Well, again, Roger, I really appreciate it. This has been an honor. Like I've been looking forward to this for quite a while since we got this together. So I appreciate it.
Good. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everyone watching, may the force be with you.
Absolutely. It is with you.
Yes, always.